Educators Lead, episode 132.
Being patient and knowing how to cue into timing can be really effective. Early in my administrative career, I wanted to do everything right now. What I've learned is it's better to prime the pump, and you can go slow to go fast, and you don't have to do everything right now. And I have experienced creating a lot more obstacles for myself in an effort to just get things done that wouldn't have surfaced if I had just been a little more patient.
Welcome to Educators Lead, where we interview leaders in education to offer inspiration and practical advice to help launch educators into the next level of leadership. I'm your host, Jay Willis, and I want to thank you for subscribing to our show.
This is John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and you're listening to Educators Lead. Let's join my friend Jay Willis and get ready to take your leadership to the next level.
Hello, EduLeaders. Jay Willis here, and I'm excited to introduce our featured guest today, Connie Hamilton. Connie, are you ready?
You betcha.
All right, Connie Hamilton has served as an elementary teacher, middle school ELA teacher, instructional coach, and principal at both the elementary and middle school levels. She now serves as the K-12 curriculum director in Saranac Community Schools and provides professional development nationally that focuses on questioning best instructional practices, literacy, assessment, and leadership. Connie is the co-author of Hacking Homework from the Hack Learning series of innovative thinking around education. So that's just a brief introduction, Connie, but tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, that really kind of sums it all up right there. I am married for 20, some odd years. And we have 3 kids, and 2 of them are in high school, and one just finished his freshman year of college. So it has been really nice to offer that perspective of a really clear secondary and post-secondary look at education in my most recent past, because most of my professional experience is at the elementary and middle school level. So I feel like I have a good broad perspective and have had some aha moments here in the past few years. So That's cool.
I bet. I can only imagine what it's like in the teenage years. We have 3 kids, but they're 3, 6, and 10. So teenage years are coming, but we still have a couple more years. Yeah. I'm still cool for maybe a couple years.
Oh, yeah.
So what would be maybe something interesting about yourself that most people wouldn't know?
Because I spend so much of my time, of my waking hours with pretty high cognitive demand. I'm reading a lot. I'm writing, that kind of stuff, and processing all of the time. When I have downtime, I don't even prefer to watch TV that has any kind of a plot. I like to watch like reality TV shows. So, because I don't have to pay attention, I can tune in and out. I can, get up and go do something, and it doesn't really interfere with my comprehension. So I'm kind of a reality TV junkie, and not like Housewives or like nothing that, because those things actually have a plot, but like, I don't know, like The Voice or American Idol, like competition shows, cooking shows, that kind of stuff. And anybody who's listened to the podcast that I recorded for Better Leaders also knows that one of my favorite ones is a tattoo show, which is funny because if you knew me, you would know that I would never, ever, ever in a million billion years get a tattoo. But I love to watch it.
Now that's funny. So what intrigues you about that?
Well, my son is illustration major in a design school. And so I look at it from the artistic perspective, but really what I enjoy most about the show is the critique. So I like to hear the feedback that the tattooers provide, and then I try to parallel how I provide feedback in my world, but it's feedback in an area that I know very, very little about. So I think that's the piece of it that I know, is that the content is new for me, but the format is familiar.
Well, that's fascinating. So what's been one of the biggest takeaways as far as how they provide the critique?
It's parallel. It's parallel to what we know about providing quality feedback for students and for teachers. So you begin with an expert model, you show what quality looks like, and then you strive to achieve that. But you take the student, we'll call the student, or in this case, the tattooer, you take them where they are, you identify and clearly articulate this is what you're doing, and then you give them the very next step to help them progress toward perfection. So I think sometimes we describe perfection so much and we look at, this is the end goal, but the learner doesn't necessarily know what sequence of steps to take in order to achieve that goal. And so very often what happens is they look at that goal and they then deem it unobtainable because they really don't know how to get from point A to point Z. And what we really need to do is how do we get from point A to B to C and then eventually to Z. So that has just been really affirming.
Yeah, show people the path. That's so great, because a lot of times you'll look at a goal or something you're trying to accomplish, and if you show it to somebody who's really a long way from that, they just are going to throw up their hands with overwhelm and think there's no way I'm ever going to accomplish that. And they just get frustrated. But if you actually show them the strategy, like what it's going to take step by step, the path to get there, then they could actually see themselves accomplishing that. Or they may not even think I'm on my way to accomplishing that, but you're just showing them, okay, here's the next step. Here's the next step. Here's the next step. And they look back and they're like, wow, look at what I just did.
Yes, it's a really concrete way to differentiate between fixed and growth mindset, in that sense that, that fixed mindset tends to look at the end goal and say, I'll never get there, versus the growth mindset looks at what do I need to do in order to eventually get there.
Oh, wow, that's great. Who knew you could learn so much from a tattoo show, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Wow.
Go.
Well, so I guess for people who may not be familiar with your story, maybe if you could start from the beginning and talk about how you got to where you are today. Maybe even, that moment when you first made the decision to go into education, and then take us from there to where you are now.
Well, I don't think that I have a crazy unique story. It's probably very similar to many people in the education field, and started when I was really young. I was an only child for 10 years. And so in order to entertain myself, I often played school. And since I was the only one in my bedroom playing school, I served as the smart kids, the dumb kids, and the teacher. And so I would take worksheets and bring them home, and I'd beg my real teachers for worksheets. I'd take them home and I would answer all the questions, and then I would get my red pen out and correct the answers and put big X's to the, what I would, the dumb kids, quote unquote, in my perspective of my 8-year-old mind or 9-year-old mind. And so I think I always had that itch and strive. I always wanted to be a teacher. And I did pretty well in school. I played the game of school and did what I needed to do, and was convinced by my parents that your listeners will probably relate to this. There's not a lot of thanks or financial gain to being in the profession of education. And so my mom convinced me to be an aeronautical engineering major and to use my math skills. So I did. I applied to Michigan State and began my career as an aeronautical engineering major. And 2 classes into calculus, I decided, I don't want to do this. And so I changed my major and never told my mom for a year, and was an education major, went to the education school, and then eventually mustered up the courage to let my parents know that this is what I wanted to do. And even then, she said, well, couldn't you use that degree to maybe open up a daycare center and, maybe be a business owner or something? She's just really continued to veer me away, and I just couldn't. So I graduated with an elementary degree, couldn't get a job at that time in Michigan. The jobs were just not to be found. So I moved to Texas. I taught in Texas for a few years, and then eventually came back here to Michigan, where, as you read, I was a teacher and served as a teacher leader, really using all of the leadership opportunities that I could through school improvement, and, accreditation programming, and all that kind of thing. And then finished my master's degree and got my administrative degree, and got an assistant principal, then a principal, and then another principal, and and then so on and so on.
So now, where were you at in Texas?
Yes, I was in Alief, Texas, just outside of Houston.
Oh yeah, okay.
Well, you're in Texas.
We're in
right?
Beaumont. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just down the road from Houston. Yeah, that's pretty neat. So how long were you in Texas then?
About 2 years.
Okay.
About 2 years. You'd almost sound like you're from Texas.
Well, I've been all over. So originally from around the Kansas City area, and then I've traveled to actually all 50 states. So I've had a chance to kind of spend time in lots of places.
When we had the opportunity to move back home, we snagged it. So we returned back here to Michigan and been back here ever since.
All right. So before we dive in and talk about more about your personal journey, I'd like to kind of I'd like to learn a little bit more about your latest book, Hacking Homework, 10 Strategies That Inspire Learning Outside the Classroom. So first of all, what is the Hacking series? What's that all about?
Well, the Hacking series is a thematic approach, I guess, about really being innovative and trying to tackle some of the major issues in education from an innovative perspective. And so trying to think outside the box, but still staying true to what works. So Mark Barnes is our publisher, and he, along with Jennifer Gonzalez, are the co-authors of the first book in the series, which is Hacking Education.
Okay. Well, and so tell us about Hacking Homework. What is that book all about, and where did your path to that book begin?
Well, homework has always been sort of a wondering and a stickler for many educators, and Mark was interested in having a book around homework. And Star Saxton, my co-author, and I had worked on a couple of projects prior, and she's written many books. Since this was the first book that I was writing, I felt a bit more comfortable having a co-author with some experience. So I approached her and said, hey, would you like to do this together? And her wheelhouse is really around assessment. And so homework is really a cousin to assessment, and lots of teachers use it as an assessment tool. And so together we were able to provide a pretty broad perspective. So as I mentioned in the introduction, most of my experience is at the elementary level, but I'm a mom of secondary kids. Star is the exact opposite. Her professional experience is at the secondary level, and she has a son at the elementary level. So we kind of had it covered from both the mom point of view and the educator point of view. So the book is not about, picket signs with down with homework. The book message is really about asking teachers to be intentional and thoughtful when they consider whether or not to assign homework. And when they do assign homework, being thoughtful and intentional with how that time outside of the classroom is allocated. So things like, not giving homework just because that's what we've always done. Looking at the fact that many teachers use things like time or time constraints to say, hey, okay, we didn't finish this, now go home and finish it as your homework. That's a really poor structure for learning, because the scaffolds and supports that students need when they're just beginning to learn new concepts don't exist at home. And so that's not a good time to provide homework, is when students are outside of that independent learning and they're in what we call the zone of proximal development. They need to be in school so that they have the proper guidance in order to foster success. So those are just a couple of, things to take away. And then, of course, the biggie, and the one that kind of gets my blood pressure up, is counteracting the perception that people believe that homework teaches students to be responsible. And my pushback to that is homework expects students to be responsible and then punishes them when they're not. There is no teaching. It's just expectation. And so really getting that point clearly across was one of my main goals in writing that chapter in particular. But just when we talk about the book, that's always a theme that comes up over and over, is how do you expect them to learn responsibility? Well, I expect kids to learn anything through direct instruction, not just assessment.
So what would be probably, if an educator read that book and then put it down, what would you hope that they kind of walked away with?
I would hope they walk away with, maybe I ought to think about how I assign homework a little more purposefully. And not just do it the way it was done to me.
Right. So are there any, giving us maybe a sneak peek into the book, are there any kind of strategies or ideas that you would have for that? Because if there's maybe a teacher listening who's saying, oh, that sounds great. Is there a strategy or something that would help? I guess maybe, are there some that you outline in the book that you could share?
Yeah. So one of the ideas is that when homework is assigned, oftentimes the feedback that we get from parents is, I don't know how to help my kid. I don't remember how to do this content. It's been so long, et cetera, et cetera. And typically the advice that we give parents are things that are environmental. So we suggest give them a quiet working space, provide some procedures, have them ask questions of their peers or check the website or yada yada. And we don't empower parents to take an active role in supporting their students in a really generic way. So one of the chapters has some very specific questions that parents can learn to pose that trigger cognition, but aren't specifically connected to any kind of content. So for example, one of the questions might be, where have you tried this before? Or how are you going to break this question down? Or how are you going to think about that? Does that make sense? How do you know? So all of those questions can be used in any content area at any grade level, but it helps students to be thinking about what it is that they learned. So what might be some strategies that you could use to approach? Did that work? No. Oh, okay. So what else can you try if that didn't work? But just continuing to help them to persevere, as opposed to rolling up your sleeves, getting frustrated, ending up with family battles over something that's really not worth damaging family relationships. So I am guilty of saying to my kids, this isn't worth it. Sleep is more important. Go to bed. And if your teacher has an issue with it, have them give me a call. But it's midnight and you're cranky and I'm crankier, so just go to bed.
Yeah. And sometimes it's amazing, especially when you sleep on it. A lot of times, I don't know if your brain's processing it or whatever, but you wake up and you have kind of a renewed perspective a lot of times when you do that.
Well, definitely. And, to be blunt, there's more research around having a rested brain and being able to think thoughtfully than there is support for actually doing homework. So, wow. In that case, you're better off to sleep than you are to do the boring, stupid worksheet.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that excuse would probably work very well to your teacher, but, I went to sleep, so sorry I didn't get my homework done last night. But
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess that kind of just goes back to the notion of being thoughtful about what and how you're assigning homework outside of the school day. So if you're expecting students to, if you're a high school teacher and you give students 30 minutes of homework, you might not think like that's a big deal. Hey, you have all this time after school. But when you consider that students have 6 classes, and if every teacher has that perspective, now you're dealing with 3 hours of homework, and that leaves no time for extracurriculars or a job or, heaven forbid, some family time. It really limits how students use their precious time. So it isn't to say that homework doesn't have a place. It just is being thoughtful about, does it actually have to trump every other activity that students have after school? And is it possible that there are some other activities that might be more meaningful and more productive than doing 35 math problems? Because what are the other kids going to say if you don't have to do those 35 math problems?
Right.
I mean, my son got a shop and he had to memorize all of the different recipes for the coffee, and he had to do the math for, what happens if somebody orders their drink skinny, reduced cal, and he had to take an assessment for that. So he spent a lot of time studying those pieces. And here he has a language arts teacher that sends him home with 20 vocabulary words to look up the definitions for those vocabulary words. And I think about, in a life skill, which of those tasks are going to be more beneficial to him. Looking up definitions on dictionary.com and copy pasting them into a worksheet is not going to help my son learn vocabulary. But studying those recipes and calculating the formulas to make those recipes is not only going to be meaningful for him, but it's going to put money in his pocket too. So if I only have 30 minutes available in my evening, which one is more meaningful? It's sort of just those kinds of questions. It's not, like I said, it's not down with homework. It's just making sure that we really are sending the message that we want to say when we suggest that homework is the most important thing that a student does after 4 o'clock.
Yeah, and I think you probably have to think about what's your objective, right? Not just, let's just not give busy work, but what do you really want to have happen? What do you want to accomplish by having these students do their homework? And if it's for them to learn something, well, I mean, if that's your objective and you're really thinking about serving them by having them learn certain concepts, then I think you'd probably like the title of the book, Hacking Homework, would probably indicate, it's like, let's figure out a way to shortcut this. Like, let's just get the shortest path between where we are now and where we want these students to be without giving them a bunch of busy work just for the sake of being busy.
Yes.
So I don't know if it was in your book summary or one of your workshops where I saw some mention of kind of a gradual release of responsibility. Can you elaborate on kind of what you mean by that statement, what that looks like?
So gradual release of responsibility in the classroom is a pretty commonly used best practice identified by Doug Fisher, Nancy Fry. And there's a pyramid, and a lot of times people shortcut gradual release by calling it the I do, we do, you do format. And we use it for students when we model and we provide a focus lesson and they look at the model, or we provide a purpose for what the learning target is going to be for the lesson. So that's the focus lesson. And then we move on to, hey, we're going to do this together. I'm going to help you. I'm going to do a little piece. You're going to do a little piece. I'm going to just sort of give you a bit of rope, string, and give you some distance, but I'm going to be real close by, scaffolding you all the way. Then the next phase is you do together. So offering students an opportunity to collaborate together and use their peers as that scaffold and support instead of the teacher. And then finally, using this progression, allowing students to work independently once a skill has been deeply understood. And this is a model that's used in classrooms all across the country. Yet what we know and we use in our classrooms, we don't apply to teacher learning. So teacher learning looks more like I do, which is the one and done PD, and then you do on your own. Good luck with that. And oh, by the way, here's a binder you can put on your shelf. So if you do need help, you're still on your own. So in my work, in my consulting work, and in the district where I am employed now, we are implementing systems where teachers observe each other for the purpose of providing feedback around new learning. So, for example, in my role, I do a lot of work, a lot of professional development in the area of questioning. So districts that I partner with, I provide, your kind of your traditional basic whole class, we'll call it whole class instruction, which is like your basic PD. So here's kind of the foundation, here's the research, here's the why of what it is that you're learning around questioning. And then after that, we follow up with observations in small cohorts of 4 to 6 teachers, where each teacher hosts once during the school year, and the other teachers in the cohort and I provide feedback on how they're implementing what it is that we learned in the PD. And this is that timely and specific feedback. And it goes back to what I said earlier in regards to so many times in a PD, we show the video of somebody doing questioning, awesome, and the students are engaged, and oh my goodness, those kids are even asking questions of each other, and look at what we can achieve. And the teachers are looking at that going, not in my classroom. And so we fail to identify where teachers and students are in their learning of a new strategy or implementation program that is coming to the school, and what the final vision looks like. And we don't offer enough support or feedback or guidance along the way. We just expect teachers after a 6-hour PD to get it and be experts. And that just isn't how learning occurs. We send the wrong message. Teachers are already really hard on themselves. We expect ourselves to be perfect. Many teachers are reticent to try innovative things because they're afraid that it isn't going to go well, or they don't have a really thorough understanding and they don't want to build the plane as it's flying. And this structure of gradual release for teachers, I call it SIFT, CIFT, collaboration and instructional feedback teams, allows teachers to be vulnerable and say, yeah, I learned this, but I forgot about that piece. Or I understand this as a concept, but my goodness, implementing it in the classroom is a whole nother story. And then the people in the cohort, they build their own efficacy. What we know through John Hattie's work is collective teacher efficacy is the new number one. And so when teachers believe and they have the resources in order to make a difference, the research shows that they actually do. And so this is one way of really building that and showing teachers that, yes, you have it in you and you don't have to be perfect from the beginning, but you can support each other and also grow your own craft through a collaborative process.
Yeah, this sounds like it really goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning when you were using the kind of the tattoo folks as an example of just, there's probably not enough time spent on showing people the path to something. They look at examples of here's what awesome looks like. Okay, all right, everybody go home, and then they think, great, now I know what that looks like, but I have no idea how to get there.
Yes. And it's so funny too, because as we were beginning this process, so many educators are so prone to just show me and then I can do it. Just show me and I'll be able to figure it out. And if you think about that, how many times that we'll use the tattooer example, how many times do you sit behind over somebody's shoulder and watch them tattoo and then turn around and expect to be able to do it yourself? It's just not reasonable. You actually have to do it yourself and then get feedback and figure out what you don't understand yet. Or, hey, I got this piece down. I really understand how to hold the machine, or I really know how to shade, or I really know how to prep the skin, or, I don't know. I'm making all this up, by the way, because I don't know anything about tattooing. But what I don't understand is how to outline the tattoo and make it really smooth. And so that's what I need work on. That's what I need to practice. And when you can isolate where your weaknesses are, then the end result just becomes that much better. It is no different than a kid coming to a teacher and saying, I don't get it. And the teacher says, what don't you get? I don't know, all of it. When we have students who can articulate, I don't understand how you got from step 2 to step 3. There's a gap there. I know what to do after I get to step 3, but I don't know how to get to step 3. Then the teacher is like, oh, okay, now I know how to help you. As opposed to starting back from the very beginning because they don't have a clear understanding of where their gaps are.
Right. Yeah. And I think that the student who already understood, or the teacher, whatever the example, but who already understood the first couple steps really well, but just didn't know, maybe the third step, they're going to get bored as you're reviewing the first 2 steps. It's like, okay, I already got that. And so you're kind of just wasting your time and not really listening to what their needs are, you know?
Right. And you see that because kids will be like, I know. And the teacher's sitting there saying, well, then what don't you know? And there's just this inability to clearly articulate what the needs are for learning. And that is just something that I have really grown to be able to notice and appreciate how much you can expedite the learning process when you can pinpoint exactly where the problem is. It's the same in any profession. Think about a mechanic. Think about a doctor. Any profession has to pinpoint the problem and solve the problem. Otherwise, you're just putting a Band-Aid on things and hoping that that'll fix it. But you have to get to the root of it in order to really make sound difference.
Right. Well, so I want to jump in just for a minute here. I've really enjoyed talking about just all of these different topics, but I want to talk briefly just about your journey, your own personal journey. I guess kind of, was there a point, because you were teaching in the classroom, how long were you in the classroom before moving into leadership?
Maybe less than 10 years, okay. I would say, yeah.
So was there a moment, was there kind of a story around what caused you to first think about going into school leadership, and what was that?
I don't know if there was necessarily a aha moment. My whole life I've always been, graduated to looking at leadership positions. So even as a student, I was on student council and I was captain of an athletic team and, those kinds of things. I was just drawn to those types of positions. I don't know if it's because I'm bossy or controlling or but one of the things is I really appreciate big picture. I'm a systems person. I have really grown to be strategic, and being in that leadership capacity, you have a lot more ability to look at systems and seek the vision as opposed to being in just the day-to-day, gee, I hope this makes it somewhere. So I was just held a lot of leadership roles, and my administration encouraged me to seek a degree in administration as well, in ed leadership. So I thought I wanted to be a counselor. So I went back and got my master's degree. See, I never had clarity really on what I wanted to do with my career. Aeronautical engineering, counseling, I was all over the board. So I started my master's in counseling, and I am not kidding. It was a weekend class. And in the very first class, I thought, good heavens, I cannot be quiet enough to be effective in this role. I'm a talker. I'm a doer. This is not going to be a good career for me. And so that's when my principal at the time, I finally went, okay, even if I never use my degree in administration, it's going to improve my teaching skills to have that leadership eye. And then once I got into it, I really took to it. I loved my law class, and that wasn't something everyone loves, but I really enjoyed my law class.
Well, so what were some of the biggest struggles that you encountered kind of along the journey to becoming a school leader? Because your kids were pretty young at that time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I was actually pregnant with my last daughter when I was an assistant principal becoming a principal. And she was born in March. And so that very last year I was transitioning. The principal was moving to central office and I was going to move into his office. And here I was out for 6 weeks after I'd had her. So yes, that was definitely a struggle. And as I look back on my personal life, that's probably something that I regret, is the amount of time and energy that I put into my career at the time is probably had an impact on my other kids, because I wasn't always as attentive to their growth, and, had lots of late nights and worked on weekends. And my daughter, when I moved to Saranac, she was in preschool at the time. And I was just talking to a colleague of mine the other day who said, yeah, I remember when Allison was in elementary school and she would sleep under your desk at night while you worked. And she would have breakfast, lunch, and dinner at school. And it wasn't until she was in 7th grade, when we transferred her to a school that's closer to where we actually live, that she finally understood that school isn't a 12-hour-a-day event. And so, it definitely had an impact on my kids.
Yeah. Well, so how did you navigate some of those challenges? Or I guess what would be some of the takeaways or things that you learned through that experience?
Well, I'm blessed to be married to a wonderful man that shares a parenting role. And so, you see Mr. Mom, the movie. We made some marriage decisions early in our marriage in regards to making sure that our kids were put forth first. And he could see that I was loving what I was doing. Really, I would even say more so in the past, maybe 3 to 4 years. We had a pivotal moment. We went out to dinner. We had Italian. We had, he was driving. I had some wine. And we talked about our careers. And at that time, he was in sales and he was traveling. And my consulting aspect of my life was really taken off. And I was away from home too. And you don't have teenagers yet, but you can't leave them home alone. Even though you might feel like they're responsible, you can leave them home for a couple hours here and there, but overnight, heck no.
Yeah.
Not especially one of them that I'm thinking of. And so we made the decision at that time. He left his sales position and he took on another job that offered a lot more flexibility in his time and allowed him to be at every wrestling match, every cross-country meet, every band performance. And I, of course, was there when I was in town, but my kids never had an empty seat in the stands. And that was a decision that we made together. And I'm very, very fortunate that he has supported my career in that capacity. But he said, you love what you do more than I love what I do. And so it just makes sense.
Wow. In all the stories I've had the privilege of hearing just of, the stories of personal journey that's brought people to the leadership positions that they're currently in. And I think probably in all of them, there is a good support system in place that's helped them get to where they are. Mm-hmm.
I can see that. Makes good sense.
Well, so kind of a question that I have along those lines, I know that as a leader, you have a lot of responsibilities that you're trying to manage. And sometimes it can just be challenging because you need to be strong and supportive for everyone else. So what do you do to recharge and kind of get recentered when things go a little crazy, either in your work, your personal life, or even both?
I bake. I'm not joking. Ask the teachers in my building. I bake. It's very therapeutic for me, and my love language is acts of service. And so I get to provide a service and a treat and some affirmation for folks. So it still feels like I'm being productive with my time because I have an outcome, and the next day I can make somebody happy with some sort of a treat. but it helps me take my mind off of things, and I really allows me to let go of whatever is on my mind, even if it's just a brief mental break. It does provide that for me. And then, unlike going for a walk or reading a book, there's a product that is there. And so for me, that's something that's important to feel like, okay, I accomplished something, and here is the evidence of what I accomplished during my time. I didn't just sit down and watch a tattoo show.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'd heard of retail therapy, but bake therapy is a new one for me. So that's good.
Well, let me tell you, the teachers I work with, they kind of like it.
I'm sure they do. Yeah, I would too. So what's like your all-time, what are you most known for as far as baked goods go?
Two things. I am known for cookie pizzas, a variety of flavors, and pretzel bark. And pretzel bark is fantastic. It's pretzels, toffee, chocolate, and then sea salt on top. And it is amazing.
That sounds great.
It is. Even if I say so myself.
Yeah, no, it sounds fantastic. Well, so, you've been in school administration leadership for a while, and I'm sure that you have some amazing stories to share of the impact that you've been able to witness or to be a part of. But what has been your best or one of your best moments as a school administrator?
I guess in my age, I have really grown to appreciate going back to my roots of inspiring others. And so at one point, I had some opportunities career-wise and considered leaving the district where I am. And I've been there for 12 years. And there was a teacher who came and sat me down and said, I don't want you to leave this district without hearing what an impact that you've been on me and in my ability to teach. And she went on to provide a lot of details, and maybe a bit humble now to share the details around that. It feels a little awkward, but I'll just say that I really walked away with a feeling that I had inspired her and made a difference. And it just felt so good. And I often go back to that moment and think, okay, because administration and leadership is lonely. And it's very often, you go very long stretches of time without compliments. And so, that's one thing you have to get used to, moving from the classroom to the office. And so when you get something like that, especially as meaningful and specific as it was, it carried with me, and I guess it still does because I'm talking about it now, for a very long time. And so I try to use that as motivation when it doesn't necessarily feel like I'm making an impact today, that I remember that it takes time and it takes investment in people, and none of that happens overnight.
Yeah. I bet that was a neat moment.
Very much so.
Yeah, that's one of those things that's hard, especially when you deal with a lot of because, in administration, you kind of get to see the dark side as well as the, you get to see the good and the bad, but a lot of people, you kind of have this, you're sort of blissfully naive, I think, a lot of times when you don't have to see like the worst of what's going on in a school, I would imagine. And so then when you are exposed to that, it's kind of, and there's not really a lot of times people you can tell about all that stuff. So I can imagine that would be difficult. And then you probably have those lots of moments where you think, man, am I making an impact? Am I doing what I'm here to do, which is to try to impact lives? And then when you have a story like that, I'm sure that kind of makes it all worth it.
It sure does. And you're right. You really hit the nail on the head there, because so many of our days are filled with putting out fires. And, at the elementary school, it's, hey, are we going to have indoor or outdoor recess? Is it really raining a lot? Or, hey, we ran out of French toast sticks and now we have an angry parent, and, all of those kinds of components. Then all of a sudden the bell's ringing and it's 2:45 and it's time to go home. And you think, what in the heck did I accomplish today? And so those single days can be frustrating, but I think we sometimes downplay the impact that you can have just walking through the hallway, of smiling at somebody or giving them a high five. You just never know when that's going to come back around, and where in the process of that person's life and in that person's mission are you contributing? Are you just planting a seed? Are you nurturing a seed? Or are you going to be the difference today that really causes somebody to change what they're doing or make a better decision or whatnot? So it's just making sure that every little thing is noticed and appreciated, and that you don't walk away feeling like your day was wasted.
Well, so I'm going to roll through some rapid fire questions if you're ready for those.
All right.
So, well, before I ask, I was kind of curious before I jump into these, what, with so many options out there, how do you go about, and maybe this may not be a quick answer, but I was just curious, how do you go about choosing a curriculum?
Choosing a curriculum?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many options. I'm curious, where do you start and how do you do that? So
by that, do you mean like purchasing curriculum materials?
Yeah, I just mean kind of like narrowing down your focus and figuring out, this is probably be the best one for my school, for my student.
Yeah, so you're in Texas, so you're a non-Common Core state, right?
Right.
So in Michigan, we follow standards, and they're Common Core aligned standards. But really, I think every state has their own standards. So we just begin with that. You identify the standards, and really, in a nutshell, identify the standards and the non-negotiables in regards to the instructional approach that we want to utilize. So some curriculum materials lend themselves to one kind of teaching style, and other materials lend themselves to a different kind of teaching style. So assuming that everything that is pitched to us is aligned to the standards and doesn't create learning gaps, then the next component is looking at what are the best instructional practices that we want to support through the materials, and how do we have resources that make it as easy as possible for teachers to implement those strategies. And then from there, you can look at the bells and whistles, but those are the non-negotiables. So bells and whistles would be like, what is the parent component? What do the, what's the technology that comes along? What are interventions that are in play? What might be advancements for GT kids? All that kind of stuff. But really separating what's not negotiable and what must we have, so that you don't get teased by, oh, look at this sparkly extra tool that you get for free, and then tempted to purchase something that sacrifices your philosophy. I'll try to be more concise in your rapid fire questions.
No, that's great. That's great. Okay. So now I'm about to roll through some rapid fire questions if you're ready for those.
I'm ready.
So first off, what is the best leadership advice you've ever received?
I would say paraphrase your butt off. Whenever you're in a difficult situation and you're not sure how to handle it, or somebody is so hot that logic isn't working, paraphrase and pay particular attention to emotions. Works every time.
What would be an example of that?
See, now it's not rapid fire anymore.
Well, I know, but I guess I got to dig into that a little bit because I'm curious. I'm like, how does that look like in conversation? So somebody's upset and they're coming at you. How does that look?
So I can see that it's really important to you that the consequence that is bestowed on your child is fair and equitable. So I can see that you are really upset about the fact that you weren't communicated with in a timely fashion. So it's really important to you that the teacher acknowledges the fact that your child is making an effort in the classroom. So safety is a big concern for you and you're concerned that your child might not be safe here at school, and you want to make sure that we have proper safety channels in place.
Right. Okay. Right. So they voice a concern, you kind of paraphrase it back to them.
Yes. And then your indication that you're doing it well is you can see in their body language and in their tone immediately when they soften and they say, yeah, yes, that is what I want. Then you can begin to approach that more logical brain because the emotion is satisfied. So you have to separate emotion and message, and emotion trumps message every time.
Yeah. And then they feel like they're heard, I'm sure, after you paraphrase.
Yep.
Yeah.
Paraphrase your butt off. If you don't know what to do, just paraphrase.
I like it. So what would you say is your biggest strength as a school leader?
I think I am very visionary, and I am able to see connections to things that people might not typically connect. So, an example in today is looking at how feedback is everywhere, even in a tattoo show.
Well, so obviously Hacking Homework, that's a fantastic book everybody should get. And I'll put that in the show notes so people can find it easily. But aside from that, is there maybe a book or two that you would recommend for other school leaders, maybe that have made a big impact on you?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I haven't gotten through the whole thing yet, but what I'm browsing now is Collaborative Leadership by Peter DeWitt. And what I really like about this book is we as leaders are encouraging teachers to use effect sizes and research practices. And what Peter outlines in his book is what are the leadership roles that we hold that support that research around John Hattie's effect sizes, and how can we foster that? So it includes things like collective teacher efficacy, providing feedback, kind of going back to that notion, and looking at family engagement. How do we provide professional development that's meaningful for teachers? So it's not just teachers in the classroom, but it's we as leaders looking at the whole building that is meaningful. So that's Corwin Press is the publication.
Yeah, Peter DeWitt. He was a guest way back, episode 12, a long time ago. Great guy.
Wow.
Really enjoyed that conversation.
He is actually a really great guy. I've met him. I've had the privilege of meeting him several times, and he is just as nice as he seems, and he's a really genuine person.
Oh, yeah. Very down to earth. It was great. Well, so, what advice would you have for a school administrator as far as working with the students that they serve?
Well, I imagine this is a common theme, so I'm not going to be incredibly innovative here, but it's a no-brainer. Relationships are everything. And rapport that you have with kids is going to really help you in the long run, more so than any other thing that you do. Well,
it may be the same answer, but kind of along those lines, what one piece of advice would you have for a school leader as far as working with the teachers?
Again, yes, I would say relationships kind of couples that. And I would also add that being patient and knowing how to cue into timing can be really effective. Early in my administrative career, I wanted to do everything right now. And what I have learned, maybe this is the strategic side of me and that kind of visionary perspective, but what I've learned is it's better to prime the pump, and you can go slow to go fast, and you don't have to do everything right now. And I have experienced creating a lot more obstacles for myself in an effort to just get things done that wouldn't have surfaced if I had just been a little more patient.
Yeah, that's hard because you're super motivated and excited when you're new at something, and then just to kind of learn that patience because you want everything done right now, and then just learning like, okay, but there's a billion things we could do, and sometimes it's not that we don't want to do it, it's just maybe now is just not the right time.
Yes, if you try to do too much, you really do nothing. Well,
so I guess the last question I have, if you had a time machine and you could jump in it and go back to the point in time when you first made the decision to go into school administration, what advice would you go back and give to that younger version of yourself?
I guess I would kind of just go back to being patient and strategizing and have a plan and stick to the plan. And maybe I would add to make sure that plan is transparent and as well. And I might even go so far as to say over communicated. That's probably something that I didn't do well. As I was developing a vision, I didn't necessarily want to share an incomplete vision. And so sometimes I chose to share less. And I think that was probably a mistake.
Yeah. In what ways do you think it was a mistake?
Well, keeping people in the dark is never a good thing.
Yeah.
And so you're better off to be really transparent in what it is that you don't know yet. And I might attribute that to the fact that I was, I think I was 29, 30 years old when I got my first administrative position. So being young and being female, I felt like I had two strikes against me, and I felt like I had something to prove. And in that first and second year, I was really attached to my title, more so than I should have been. And that interfered with me being as effective as I could have been. So thankfully, I was able to learn from that experience. And then I moved districts, and that certainly helped me to implement the learning from those mistakes and not make the same ones again. So I got a fresh start, which proved to be pretty successful because I've been there ever since.
Yeah. Well, how do you think that's helped your team members? I mean, if you were to compare yourself kind of when you were kind of new and 29 and maybe were tight-lipped about a lot of things that were going on. I don't know about tight-lipped, but just you didn't communicate maybe as much as you do now. Like, how does it look different now than it did back then?
Whenever possible, I am a team member and not a team leader. And that's very different than before. I felt like I always had to be the leader, and I had to prove that I had the knowledge, and I was embarrassed when I didn't have information. And now it is my preference to sit back and allow other people to be the leader, build capacity. I mean, for example, there are some committees that we have chairs, and I meet with the chairs before the meetings to help them to strategize and think about how to run the meeting effectively so that they can be successful in their role as a teacher leader. And then at that time, I just sit back and I become an active team member as opposed to a leader. So my role in any kind of a collaborative situation is very, very different than how I approached my role earlier in my career.
Well, I would guess that the team interaction would look different with those two scenarios too, right? Like when you're in the role of more of a collaborator, that has to, I would guess the team is much more engaged in that situation.
Sure. You want to talk about creating buy-in. I mean, it was before really the option is to comply or not comply, as opposed to, hey, let's create this from the ground up. And, I don't know if it's just, I've learned a lot more. And so I'm comfortable now just saying, I don't know how to do that. Or, I don't understand this whole concept. I'm going to need some help, or we are going to need some help or whatnot. I'm very, very comfortable in that space now. And it could be, I'm more connected now. And so I feel like if there's something that I don't know right now, it won't take me very long to figure it out because I can reach out on Twitter, or I have people in my contacts that I can access that can help me. And when I was newer, I hadn't built up that network quite yet.
Well, so finally, if one of our listeners wants to reach out to you after the show, what would be the best way to connect with you?
Probably whatever is most convenient for that person. Twitter is a great way to connect with me. I am very active on Twitter, or my email is conniehamilton12@gmail.com. That's an easy way as well.
Awesome. You have a website too, right? People can check out?
I do, yes, conniehamilton.net.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to put all of that in the show notes so people can check it out.
Thank you.
EduLeaders, this has been a great interview today. For the show notes of today's show and other resources, visit educatorslead.com and type the word Connie into the search tool to find her show notes. Connie, thank you for sharing your journey with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. I am thrilled that you asked me.
And that wraps up another episode of Educators Lead. This podcast is brought to you by Mometrics, the #1 test preparation company. Mometrics offers study materials for over 1,800 different exams, including the SAT, ACT, GED, end-of-course exams, state standard exams like the STAR, teacher certification exams, advanced placement, CLEP, ASVAB, GRE, and so many more. Mometrics takes the mountains of information students could be tested over for any given exam and boils it all down to just the fluff-free golden nuggets of information that are most likely to be on the exam. They couple that with some great study tips and test-taking strategies to help students maximize their test scores. With their interactive tutorial videos and a layout that makes lesson planning easy, Mometrics study guides, flashcards, and practice questions are a great fit for individual or classroom use. To learn more about our products and our vault of hundreds of free tutorial videos, please visit educatorslead.com/test prep. That's educatorslead.com/test prep. EduLeaders, thank you for joining us on Educators Lead. Visit us at educatorslead.com for everything we talked about today, free resources, and much, much more.